What is up guys, Morton here from SteamFirst.com with a review for the 2D puzzle platformer Monochroma, developed by Nowhere Studios and released May 28th, 2014 on Steam for $20. Monochroma is an atmospheric 2D puzzle platformer that's rather obviously heavily inspired by Limbo, with the main difference being Monochroma is more about puzzles while Limbo just kills you a whole bunch. The game certainly has a lot of positives, but there are also a couple of pretty big problems that can be very frustrating to deal with. The gameplay is pretty basic 2D platforming where you control the main character and carry around his useless brother. I guess I shouldn't say useless, he's good at being a weight for some of the physics puzzles, but he makes all the non-physics puzzles much more tiresome. Some of the puzzles are pretty challenging because your brother can't move on his own for some reason, so you need to carry him around, which will slow you down and prevent you from jumping as high as normal. You can put your brother down to jump a bit higher when you need to, but he's very picky about where he's willing to be set down. Specifically, you can only put him down in a place that has light shining on it, which means two things. First off, most of the puzzles involve putting your brother down, finding a way to open a door without him, and then going back for him. And secondly, that if you ever see a light somewhere, you know to go ahead and drop your brother off there because they serve no other purpose. The controls are okay and mostly work well, but the game seems sluggish overall. There are a lot of times when you have to make very precise jumps, but the jump command is slow, and so you need to press the spacebar about a quarter of a second before you think you have to, and if you're too early or too late, you'll fall to your death. On top of that, knowing how far you can fall before you die is basically impossible. Sometimes I fell what looked like 3 stories and walked away no problem, other times I fell off something barely off the ground and died. Luckily, the checkpoints are really good throughout the game, never forcing you to redo tedious puzzles or run long distances to get back to where you were. Unluckily, the loading times are completely absurd. Once you fall into a pit or get crushed or accidentally push a cart into your brother, hilariously squishing him against the wall, the screen will fade to black and stay there for between 5 and 10 flow-breaking seconds before you're able to play again. And while 5 seconds doesn't sound like a long time, if you're trying things for a new puzzle for the first time, it's possible to die multiple times in a short window, and when you're spending 45 seconds playing the game and a minute on a black loading screen, it gives you a lot of time to think about other things you could be doing. Overall, I really did enjoy the gameplay. The puzzles are interesting and unique, and while it can be annoying to have a slight delay on jumping, it's not that game-breaking and there were only a handful of times where it's a real problem. Gameplay gets a 3.5 out of 5, with the biggest complaint being the load times in between deaths. And the use of your brother in the puzzles is almost always obvious, because there's only 1 or 2 places you can drop him off in most situations. Now on to the 2 best parts of the game, the audio and the visuals. Normally I put these into 2 separate paragraphs, but I'm just going to talk about both at once because they kind of go hand in hand. As the name implies, Monochroma is almost entirely black and white with a few splashes of red thrown about, and it looks really good. It adds a lot to the atmosphere of a dark and bleak world, mainly because it's pretty dark. On top of that, the music and sound effects also add to the atmosphere, with the soundtrack being exceptionally well done. Both sound and graphics get a 5 out of 5. For a game that's relying heavily on emotion and the feeling you get from the world, they got it right with the audio visuals. The story is about you and your brother trying to escape a city, and it's mildly interesting. The story is told through the visuals and weaves pretty nicely with the gameplay, but without any narrative or dialogue, it's hard to know exactly what's going on most of the time. Like, you know you need to run and escape the city, but your actual destination is a mystery. On top of that, there are only a handful of events that actually move the plot anywhere, and you can play for a couple hours just doing puzzles and moving to the right without seeing anything related to the story. Still though, the story gets a 3.5 out of 5, is alright and fits well with the atmosphere, although I think it would be a bit better if they had had some dialogue or something to make the characters likable. For example, the brother you carry around that's essentially just a weight to get through some of the puzzles and has no redeeming qualities. As for replayability, there's really not a whole lot of reasons to play it again. There are some secrets hidden throughout the game to try and find, and they do seem decently well hidden, but there's only a few of them and I think it'd be really hard to justify replaying the whole game just for that. So unless you really like the puzzles and atmosphere, there's not really any reason to replay anything, and while the atmosphere is nice, the puzzles lose a lot of value after you already know the solution. Replayability gets a 2 out of 5. Overall, Monochroma is far from a bad game, but it has a couple of frustrating problems, and while the game does look and sound really good, those things don't fix the issues with the gameplay itself. The sluggish controls take a lot of getting used to, and even then are annoying to deal with. Added to that, dying makes you sit through a 5 or more second loading screen, and you have good reason to be annoyed. If you can deal with those issues though, it's worth checking out. The puzzles that don't require precise jumps are well done, and the atmosphere is great. Monochroma gets a 3.5 out of 5 in total. It's a solid and interesting game that has just a couple of flaws that add a bit of aggravation to an otherwise fun experience.